Hi, my name's Ed Nolan, and today I'm going to do a little bit of modelling on the kind of thought process and decision making used to set up the helping behaviour experiment. To help you with your own planning, and what I'd like you to do is see some of the factors that I look at in the process, so you might be able to use this as well. Right, so let's get started. So first of all, we know that it is an experiment. So an experiment contains an independent variable. It'll contain two or more conditions, and that the researcher is a person who has to manipulate those conditions. And we have a look and we see what impact changing an IV will have on a DV. So I'm now going to make the assumption that helping behaviour is the thing I'm going to measure, the DV. Because I'm going to see if changing something will influence whether someone will help or not. That's kind of my initial thoughts on this. So where do we go with this? I'm like, all right, okay. Well, what I might do is have a person who's kind of walking along a corridor, and there they are walking along the corridor, and they drop, they've got to have a whole head, they drop some papers and some books. Great. And so then my DV could be is whether somebody comes along and helps them pick up the books. Yeah, that's them picking up the books. Okay, so that's whether that person comes along and helps do that. Not sure that picture really worked. But I got a problem here because I'm like, great. What's my IV? What is it? Is it somebody who's just walking along, who has no books, who holds on to their books? And so we have whether they help them or not. That doesn't work because who's going to help someone who's not dropped any books? So that doesn't really work for me. So let's just rub this off now for a minute and say, well, how could this work? Well, I could look at it a different way. Let me just rub this off. I'm going to rub that terrible picture off there as well. Let's get that like that. So maybe we could work this out in a different way. Maybe I could have male participants. They could see what's going on, and female participants, and I could see who is more likely to help somebody who's dropping some books. So who is going to help pick up the books for the person. Okay. You can see why I failed GCSE art. Okay, so I could do that. That'd be great. The problem is that's a naturally changing independent variable. So that would turn out to be a quasi-experiment, and I don't want a quasi-experiment because if I do, I write that up in the exam, I get no marks for it. It has to be an experiment. The researcher needs to manipulate the variable. So actually, maybe we could do this another way then. So we need to get rid of this quasi-experiment. So what we could do is we could have the male drop some books, if I can make that work for me on a drawing, and the female drop some books. I'm not sure why it's going the way it's going, but it's wibbling around. So we could have that, and then we could see if the that really is such a poor picture. We could see then if the participant would more likely help the male or female. Brilliant. So the researcher is manipulating the IV, are measuring a DV, we're seeing if the sex of someone in distress or dropping the books would have an impact. I could create a hypothesis from that. That works for me. Though there are some issues that I would like to bring out with this, something that I'm concerned about. So first of all, this helping behaviour. I'm a little concerned about that because whether someone helps or not, that becomes nominal. That becomes nominal data. It becomes a category. Do they help or do they not? But what issue is whether I can operationalise helping behaviour. Because, okay, yes, if someone helps pick up the books or paper, that's brilliant, that's helping behaviour. What happens if someone just says, are you okay? Is that helping behaviour or not? What happens if somebody stops another student from laughing at the person who's dropped the papers. Is that helping behaviour? Where do we go on this? How do we operationalise that? Becomes a little bit more tricky to make sure that that's a valid and reliable, a consistent measure. Also, the question is, who does the observing? Who observes? So, who observes the helping behaviour? Is it the person being helped, or is it another group of researchers who are standing by, who are there observing that? If that's the case, these observers here might have a researcher effect. They might influence whether somebody picks up the books or not, because we know from research that if you see someone who needs some help, if there are other people not helping, you're more likely not to help than if you're on your own. So I suppose they could be hidden. You can have a two-way mirror, or you could video it, or something like that. Some other issues that I'm coming up with my piece of research that I'm a little bit worried about. Some other bits that I'm worried about here, is this part. Okay, what about the situation? So might that be a problem? Situation. That's supposed to be sit there. Sorry. Okay, so right. One thing that we got to be able to have 20 participants. So at the bare minimum, you need 10 participants seeing a male drop something and 10 the females. Ideally, though, you would have to have 20 for each for statistics, because what you'll find is you won't get a significant finding with 10 on each. It's very limited. That's a lot of participants that we need to look at. So, how do we make sure that you get the same situation? The corridor is of a similar nature when they're dropping the books. That it's at the similar time. That all of these factors are playing a part. That becomes quite difficult. So if you think about it, you've got to have 20 times you've got to watch these books drop and see if someone helps. We need to ensure that it's the same situation, that the participants are in the same, they're not in big groups and then some in small groups and some on their own, that you've standardised what's going on. Maybe I could do it in the common room, and so it's always busy at lunchtime, and I do it at lunchtimes. But then other people are going to see. Another factor that probably need to pay in mind is there are around 290 psychology students. Okay, so that's approximately about 70 groups are doing this. So in 1 week, and then you've got to times that by 20, okay, suddenly you think about that. So if there were 2 groups, that would be 70 in 140. Okay, if there's 20, that's 1,400 drops of books. That's 1,400 drops of books that are going on. Suddenly, people are going to be walking around college, and there are going to be books flying everywhere and papers falling down, and probably people would know what is going on. It doesn't seem very practical to do it this way. And so the time issue is an issue. Controlling situational factors is difficult. Operationalising and measuring the helping behaviour becomes difficult. It is more fun, and it is a fun thing to do, and it's an interesting thing to do. And also, you probably would get quite valid behaviours if you could measure the helping or not. But we have too many issues. So I'm sitting right. I need to go back to the drawing board here, literally, and think, what could I do to get this to work for me? Okay, so I'm going to just rub this out. So I hope you're okay with that. So just give me a minute. I'm thinking, okay, so instead of the helping behaviour being the dependent variable, could actually helping behaviour be the independent variable? So you say, well, how does that work? The participants, you're measuring their behaviour, not what manipulating their behaviour. So we say, okay, well, let's look at it. Let's look at it this way. Maybe we could have this idea here that, okay, one group will see helping behaviour or read about helping behaviour. And the other is a control, i.e., so no helping behaviour. Okay, so no helping behaviour. So we could do that, and then we see how this influences something else. So whether you see helping behaviour or not helping, what could that influence? Well, you could say, well, yeah, well, that's pretty straightforward. You could see we're back to helping out someone pick up some books or do something like that. But we're in the same situation, all these books dropping over all over the place. So instead of actually seeing if it changes their behaviour, what about attitude? Could it influence people's attitudes towards something? So what we could do is show a stimulus of helping behaviour, whether that's a story or whether that's a film or whether you act something out, and then you could then do a questionnaire looking at their attitude towards helping. So does actually viewing helping behaviour actually have an effect on our attitudes towards helping behaviour? And so in this, what we've done is we've controlled the situational factors. It becomes much more feasible to do. Okay, attitude scale, maybe it's not as valid as seeing whether they really would help or not because people put socially desirable answers down. But suddenly you can do easily 20 participants, quite straightforward. In fact, you could probably do 20 in each group if you got into one of the classes, the psychology classes for the first year. So this seems to be a much more settled. I've overcome a lot of the practical issues. So hopefully from this modelling, this video, you've seen me model the idea of, well, how do I take into account extraneous variables, operationalising variables, practical situations, issues of validity and reliability in planning my study, and then creating one that maybe is not quite as valid in some respects, but certainly is much more feasible for a psychologist to do. Right, good luck on planning your studies.